So I want to welcome everybody to the call today. On this call today, I have a very, 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 very special guest and a friend who's going to talk up to us about the power of authenticity and how you can tap into that power of authenticity for yourself so that you can express yourself fully with confidence, so that you can confront and transform fear inside of yourself, so that you can deal with the conflicts directly and effectively, so that you can take risks and go for what you truly want, and so that you can have the freedom and the confidence in your work, your relationships, and your life. And I'm about to introduce him in a minute here. Before I do that, let me just let you know who I am. My name is Michael Brown, and I'm a spiritual life coach. And what I do is I help people to turn their heartfelt dreams into physical reality. And you can find out more about me and get a free video e-course on the law of attraction and turning your dream into reality by going to MikeBrownCoaching.com. And you can also get a free chapter of my book. I wrote a book called You Are a Gift to the World, Blessings from My Mom, and you can get a free chapter of that book by going to youareagift.com. So that brings me to a very special guest and a friend that I have here today, and I'm very, 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 very excited about this call. He is the best-selling author of the book, Be Yourself, Everyone Else Is Already Taken, Transform Your Life with the Power of Authenticity, and the other book, Focus on the Good Stuff, The Power of Appreciation. As a well-known keynote speaker and personal development expert, he has inspired tens of thousands through his speaking, workshops, coaching, and writing. He empowers people to be grateful, passionate, and authentic in their work, relationships, and lives. Now, prior to becoming an author, speaker, and coach, he was drafted by the New York Yankees out of high school, but chose instead to play baseball at Stanford University, where he pitched in the College World Series. He was drafted by the Kansas City Royals out of Stanford and played 3 seasons of professional baseball in the Royals organization before an arm injury ended his playing career while he was still in the minor leagues. He's worked with some of America's top organizations and institutions such as AT&T, Apple Computer, UC Berkeley, Google, Chevron, the U.S. Department of Labor, Wells Fargo, New York Life, and he's also a member of the National Speakers Association, and he is one of less than 6% of professional speakers in the world to have earned the prestigious Certified Speakers Profession designation. He's also been featured on ABC News, the Oprah Radio Network, Forbes, Fast Company, Ladies Home Journal, Self Magazine, the Washington Post, and many, many, many more. Ladies and gentlemen, with no further ado, I give you Mike Robbins. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me on. I'm honored.
Yes, man. It's just a treasure and a pleasure to have you here, man.
Cool.
Mike, today, and I know you have 2 books, and today we're just going to focus on the one book that you have, because I felt like, if we just focused on that one book, we could get a lot out of it around authenticity. And I just kind of want to share with people, have a little bit of hear about your book, and then I will go right into the questions. But the book is called Be Yourself, Everyone Else Is Already Taken. It explores why it's hard for us to be authentic, the familiar culture and personal influences, thoughts, and fears that make it difficult for us to do and say what is true for us, or to lead us to believe who we are is not acceptable enough. Then the book presents a simple yet effective ways to exercise the power of authenticity in our relationships, work, and life. The ideas, principles, and practices laid out in this book give you specific techniques which will allow you to express yourself fully with confidence, confront and transform fear, deal with conflicts directly and effectively, take risks, and go for what you truly want, and have more freedom and confidence in your work, your relationships, and your life. Now, if you want to pick up this book, this book's available on Amazon.com. It's available on BarnesandNobles.com, but you can also get the book through Mike's website, which is BeYourselfBook.com. That's BeYourselfBook.com. And if you get the book that way, Mike gives away a ton of free gifts that you get along with buying the book there. So I highly recommend you go there and buy the book that way. So, Mike, let's just jump right into it. And, with the first question, let me just ask you, what inspired you to write a book about authenticity?
Well, there's a couple different ways I can answer that question, Michael. I have been doing the work that I do for the last 11 years, and I came to, start coaching and start writing and start speaking. As you mentioned a little bit in my, introduction, my bio, my background is in baseball, right? So I grew up, I still live here in the San Francisco Bay Area and grew up here. My dream, passion, focus from the time I was really young was playing baseball. Loved playing baseball and was pretty good. I got drafted by the Yankees out of high school, as you mentioned, and didn't end up signing with the Yankees because I got a scholarship to play baseball at Stanford University, which was pretty cool. Got to, pitch in the College World Series, as you talked about. Then got drafted by the Kansas City Royals out of Stanford and signed a pro contract. All I ever wanted to do since I was little was, play in the major leagues. And I was pretty good. I was working my way up to the big leagues, but went out to pitch one night, threw one pitch toward ligaments in my elbow, and blew my arm out.
Wow.
That was it. So now, I didn't know when I got hurt that summer. This was the summer of 1997. I was playing on the East Coast and get hurt that summer. They sent me back to California, have an operation on my arm. I ended up having 3 operations over the next 2 years, did everything I possibly could to try to come back and, make it back to playing ball again, but unfortunately I wasn't able to. And there I was, just shy of 25 years old, having focused on this dream since I was a kid, thinking to myself, now what the hell am I going to do now? I was somebody who, came from a single family. My mom raised me. We didn't have a lot of money. And I was thinking, I was going to make it to the big leagues. I was going to make some money. And what was interesting, Michael, for me is that when I hurt my arm and when it finally became clear to me that I wasn't going to be able to play anymore, I started to ask myself some really important questions. And one of the questions I asked over and over again was, did I have any regrets? And as I looked back over my whole experience as a kid, as a teenager, as a young man, and, playing baseball, I realized I didn't regret a lot of the stuff that I thought I would have, the lack of success or the games that I blew or whatever it was. It wasn't even the regret of that I hadn't made it. It was that I hadn't fully appreciated it. I was too busy trying to make it, and I was spending most of my time, even though I was pretty good, thinking I wasn't good enough, comparing myself to everyone around me, and literally like holding my breath, hoping that I didn't screw it up. And when it was all said and done and I hadn't made it, I thought, oops, I think I missed the point. So it was a pretty painful way to learn a really important lesson for me. And that, among other things, around that time in my early 20s kind of got me on my own personal and spiritual path, if you will. And then, fast forward to today, or at least I guess now 2 years ago when Be Yourself, Everyone Else Is Already Taken came out, I chose to write this particular book on authenticity. I'd written Focus on the Good Stuff, which is all about gratitude and appreciation. And it felt to me like the way that I do my work, Michael, is that, and when I write and when I speak and when I'm coaching people and teaching, it's like my approach often tends to be, I look at what I'm dealing with in my own life. I look at what I'm struggling with in my own life. I look at where I want to grow and learn, and I just trust that that's part of the way that Spirit sort of moves through me, if you will. And as I'm working on stuff and I'm trying to figure some stuff out myself, I assume there's other people who are on that same path or dealing with the same stuff. Mm-hmm. So I just try to share my experience. And that's what was going on for me at the time that really inspired me to write that book, and continues to be, that authenticity is something I find super important in relationships, in work, in everything. It's something I want from people. It's something that I crave, and I find it scary at times. I find it challenging. I'm the kind of person who loves it when people like me and have a high opinion of me, and in the moment sometimes doing or saying the authentic thing might not necessarily have them like me or agree with me. So my challenge in life has been, and how do I see that, notice that, and still choose to show up as myself? So that's a long answer to your question, but it was a lot of that behind the desire to write the book, as well as a lot of my clients and organizations that I work with. I realized one of the big things I see missing in situations where it would really make a difference is a sense of vulnerability and transparency and authenticity.
And Mike, I just want to step back for a second to make sure I was here when you were telling your story. I mean, that's an amazing story. So, Are you like do you have like a record as the only pitcher to ever pitch one pitch? You said it was the first pitch you ever pitched. It was the first pitch.
No, so it was actually I was in the Kansas City Royals organization. And, the way baseball works, and some of the folks listening to us probably know a lot about baseball. Some may not know much, and some may not even care. But basically, the way pro baseball works is all the big league teams, they draft players out of high school and college, and then you go to the minor leagues, right? And then there's different levels of the minors. A ball, double A ball, triple A ball, and so. I was in what's called high A ball. There's actually 6 levels when you break it all the way down, doing well. But I went out to pitch just one night in the middle of my 3rd season, still in the minors, and threw a pitch that night and, tore ligaments and blew my arm out. So I hadn't actually gotten to the big leagues yet. But, had I stayed healthy, Michael, without being sort of too, arrogant about my own. I mean, it's hard to make it to the big leagues even when you get drafted and sign a pro contract like I did. But if I'd stayed healthy as a left-handed pitcher with the skill and ability I had, I probably would have made it. Would I have ended up being a 20-game winner in the major leagues and made millions of dollars? That remains to be seen, but I think I was on a path to get myself to the major leagues, and if I could have stayed healthy, I'm 30, almost 38 years old now. Shoot, I could potentially still be playing if I hadn't hurt myself. So it was definitely a big left turn in my life, if you will.
Yeah, I get that. There's something about that story that it reminds me. You might have. I know you probably have heard of the movie or seen read the book, The Peaceful Warrior.
Of course.
Yeah, something about that.
Yeah, Dan Millman's actually a friend and mentor of mine, and the way The Peaceful Warrior was really. It's amazing that you bring that up. One of the first books that I read that really resonated with me on a personal, spiritual level. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was really a big Dan Millman fan, and I read Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and it just spoke to me on so many levels. In what I was going through and dealing with, I write a lot about in my first book, Focus on the Good Stuff, my battles and struggles with depression in my late teens, early 20s, and it was that time, even before my baseball career ended, that I was really struggling and grappling with who am I, what's going on, what's all these different thoughts and feelings, and I'm doing all the right things, or thought I was, to try to be happy and successful in life and playing the game, if you will, not just baseball, but life, and I just didn't feel good. I didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I was where I was supposed to be, and reading Way of the Peaceful Warrior. With anybody listening who hasn't read that book, it's probably 25, 30 years old now, but it's a classic and fundamental. I recommend it all the time. Check it out. But it was just such a perfect message for me, as you can imagine, as an athlete. And Dan is someone that I respect and admire greatly, and am honored to know and personally be able to connect with.
Beautiful, beautiful. So Mike, when you say authentic, authentic, like, what do you mean specifically?
Well, that's a good question. It's funny. Sometimes when I often say, I don't always know, because I feel like it changes, if you will. Again, there's a great saying, Michael, and I talk about this in the book, that, the great saying, there is no way to peace, peace is the way. And I sort of feel the same thing about authenticity. It's not a destination. It's not a thing. It's as they say about love, it's a verb, not a noun. It's hard to define, is a long way of me saying that. But the way that I teach and understand authenticity in my own life and talk to people about it has to do with vulnerability, transparency, realness. It may involve, for people who understand and work with either the spiritual or psychological phenomenon of the shadow, dealing with some of our dark side sometimes has to do with authenticity. But it's really about how do we show up as our authentic selves. And, and that changes, because I don't know about you, but I go through various moods throughout the course of a day, and who I am and how I show up in life is not a chameleon in the negative sense, but there's many faces to me and to my life and to my understanding of the world. And I think for all of us, it changes throughout time. I always often say to people, look at a photograph of yourself from, say, 20 years ago, or listen to something if you've recorded yourself, or something that you write, and you may laugh at it, not in a negative way, but just think to yourself, what was I thinking, or what was I wearing, or why was I doing that? But, that may have been authentic and real for you at that moment in time in your life, and then we evolve and change. But essentially, authenticity is about realness. I think Mother Teresa said it best. She had a great quote. She said, honesty and transparency make you vulnerable. And she said, be honest and transparent anyway.
Yeah, when you were saying that about those old photographs, I think and maybe you had this experience too, Mike, is I just had an image of a picture of myself with a mullet. And I was thinking to myself, what was I thinking?
Yeah, I hear you. Well, hey, man, I know it's funny. I didn't do the mullet thing, but there's definitely some things when I look back at myself in the 80s and the early 90s, and sometimes it's like the clothes and the hair and the whole bit. It seemed cool, and I'm sure it was at the time, but, things change, right. And we change and evolve. But, yeah, and I think sometimes, Michael, and you can probably relate to this as an author and as a coach and someone who works with people and is out in the world doing your work, one of the challenges, and I talk to people all the time who do similar work like you and I do, that stops us from putting our message, putting our voice out in the world, is actually a fear. And this would often get in my own way, too, when I was trying to write my first book of, what if I do it and it's A, not any good, or B, if I'm embarrassed by it, especially later on. Do you know what I mean? Because that happens. You've got a website or a couple different websites, and they've probably evolved over time, and I can remember myself, and I'm actually right now needing to upgrade and update my website because it's a couple of years old, and it's like, same thing. It's like you put it up, and it's like, oh, that's great, and I like that, and that's good, and then all of a sudden you look at it, and then over time it's like, oh, it's kind of dated, and I don't really like it anymore. It doesn't really represent me, and but I think that's just a natural phenomenon in life, and so this whole notion of being authentic for us, there's no being like, I'm authentic, that you get some kind of award or reward or certificate. It's really an in-the-moment, ongoing practice, because I don't know about you, but I can be really open and real and vulnerable and authentic in one moment, and literally the very next moment, completely full of it, and it's almost like unconscious. So for us to really develop our capacity for authenticity, we have to be somewhat vigilant about paying attention to and noticing how real we're being in any given moment in life.
Yeah, it's funny you're saying that about the videos, Mike, because I have a lot of videos. I have a lot of videos that I've done on YouTube around my teaching the law of attraction or teaching coaching pieces and stuff. And so some of these videos are 3 or 4 years old. And as you're mentioning this now, you're saying to me, I've went back and listened to some of these videos and think, I don't agree with any of that.
Yeah.
This is me talking, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't believe any of that anymore. But at that moment in time when I was saying that was authentic then. Yeah. For what I was saying, I was into that and I believe that. So, and I guess I'm saying this to say it's occurring to me, and maybe you can speak to this, is that authenticity can be, it's a changing thing, it's a moving thing. What's authentic for you today may not be authentic for you tomorrow.
Totally. And look, sometimes this gets into dicey territory. I totally agree with you. And sometimes when I start to speak about it or write about it, sometimes the feedback that I get, or the negative feedback, the critical feedback, will come in, and people will hear it like I'm talking about sort of relativism and relative morality, and sort of this notion that we talk about, I think, sometimes in the sort of New Age movement of kind of your truth, and it changes. But it does. So at some level, there's, I'm a believer that this whole notion of things being quote-unquote right and things being quote-unquote wrong, there's not a lot of black and white in the universe from my perspective. It's a lot of gray. And so what you're speaking to is that in each moment, you look back at a video from a few years back of what you were teaching, and then you look at it now and go, I don't agree with that. That doesn't resonate with me. I don't teach that anymore. In fact, I think the opposite. And that's actually what I call your own spiritual and personal evolution. And the challenge for a lot of us in life, particularly those of us like me and you, and probably many people listening to us who are teachers, whether you consider yourselves a teacher, like you do work that way and people pay you, or not, you just help other people and minister to people, so to speak, in all various ways we do in life. The challenge then becomes for us to, how do we stand in our truth about what it is we're teaching, or even just sharing with a friend or giving advice, or what we believe about life, about God and spirituality, about politics, about you name it, the stuff that we get most passionate about, relationships, and how do we stand in our truth authentically, and at the same time simultaneously have the humility to know I could be completely full of it and not know what the heck I'm talking about. And I think it's possible to stand in that paradox, and I attempt to, sometimes more successfully than others, Michael, in my own work, in my own teaching, to come at it from that perspective. Because years ago, one of my spiritual teachers said to me, if you're willing, and he was talking about this more in the context of my own personal spiritual work, he said, but willing to be wrong in service of being right. And although those words tend to trigger me, what he was trying to say was like, if the intention is to grow, if the intention is to learn, if the intention is to heal, if the intention is to love yourself or another human being or transform a situation, be willing to do it wrong, be willing to screw it up, be willing to go actually the opposite direction, because if the intention's strong enough, it'll pull you around to what you need to heal that, to change that, to transform that. And I think the same is true in all the different endeavors in life. And part of it is being able to be in touch with, in those moments, what's true for me right now, and be able to speak that and act upon that, knowing full well that in the very next moment you might realize, oops, that wasn't it. Perfect example, driving in your car. Now, nowadays we have GPS systems and different things, and, we still get lost, right? But in the old days before all of that, when you were just kind of going and you thought you knew, and even now, it doesn't matter what kind of GPS you got or directions you have or, MapQuest directions you printed out. You ever done this where you're driving, and you come up to an intersection and you go, okay, I'm supposed to go left here, and the moment you turn left, as soon as you're turning left, you go, no, it's right, but it's too late because you're going to get in an accident, right? But as you started to make that left, you were pretty darn sure, even if you knew you were pretty sure that was the right way to go. But until you got yourself lost or noticed it, sometimes it happens instantaneously. Sometimes you're 20 miles down the freeway until you realize I'm going the wrong way. But the point is, we do the best we can in the moment, and we think we're doing the right thing, when oftentimes we realize maybe that's not the case, but we can't know until we take the action.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's like the act itself is the test.
A lot of times. I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road, if you will. You teach people about the law of attraction and many other things, right? But my belief about that, too, and I used to love hearing this, and there were for many, many years, and we still do, of course, my wife and I, really into the law of attraction, into Abraham and The Secret and all the different things we were doing, but I always remember that the word action is in the word attraction, that it's like, so, there's a lot about our state of being. There's a lot about what's coming from us energetically, authentically, and then there's the part of what actions are we taking consistent with our intention that's going to make the energy move in life, if you will. Now, I'm someone who continues to work in my own life, Michael, on slowing myself down and not feeling like I have to run 100 miles an hour to go, quote, unquote, make it all happen. However, I think there's a balance point that we all need to find in our own lives, whatever we're up to in life, where we focus on what's happening internally, deeply, purposefully, but also look at what actions we're taking externally, because the action oftentimes is the feedback mechanism we need to know if what's happening inside is in alignment or not.
Wow. Let me ask you this, Mike. This is what's coming up for me. So why is authenticity so important anyways?
Well, look, I mean, one could argue that being full of it, as I like to say, or being inauthentic is easier in some ways, is sort of encouraged. I don't think we're really trained to be authentic personally. It's not like anyone teaches us to lie. However, we watch and see, and, I think about, we all have different ways we're raised, if you will, but it's like you go to the party with your family and you see your parents or someone you love and care about interact with the family members a certain way, and then get in the car and then have the real conversation about crazy Uncle Joe and whatever. You start to notice, there's certain conversations we have outside and certain ones we don't. And, my wife and I have two little girls, so, we're teaching them as best we can the ways of the world and certain things, and that's not as, a kind thing to say to someone or whatever the case may be. But I think underneath it, so why is authenticity so important? Because really I think what most of us are after in life, among other things, is a sense of freedom, a sense of personal, spiritual freedom, if you will, a freedom to be who we are, a freedom to express ourselves, a freedom to really connect with other people at a deep level. And what's fundamental in that is authenticity. Because authenticity provides an opportunity for us to resolve conflicts with other human beings that we care about, right? My wife and I have a fantastic relationship, and what's fundamental to us maintaining that fantastic relationship is an ability to be authentic with each other. Now, it's not always pretty. It's not always fun. It doesn't always feel good necessarily. But I remember actually, and I know you go to the Agape International Spiritual Center down there in Los Angeles, and I was at Agape about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was the first time I was there. And I love Michael Beckwith, huge fan of Michael and his work. He's been incredibly generous and supportive of me and my work, which I'm deeply honored by and humbled by. I was there when my first book, Focus on the Good Stuff, came out, doing a book signing, and I'm listening. I'm at the very first service I ever went to at Agape, which, as you know, because you go there, is an incredible experience. And anybody listening who lives in the L.A. area, go to Agape. If you ever travel to the L.A. area, go to Agape. It's incredible. But he did a recommitment ceremony, Michael, at the end of a service. And you may have seen him do this, so this might not be news to you. But he said something to the couple that was so simple, and it blew my mind and moved me to tears. He looked at, and these people had been married for 10, 15 years, and they were just renewing their vows. And he said to the man, he said, your job is to be her greatest fan and her greatest critic for the purpose of her spiritual development. And then he said the same thing to the woman. And as I listened to that, I broke down into tears, and I was staying for 2 services. So there was a break between. I went out and called my wife on the phone, and I said, I just got something seeing Reverend Michael do that ceremony, and that is that I sometimes struggle, and I was saying this to my wife, Michelle, I kind of go hot or cold. Like I tend to go all about how much I love you and great you are and you're amazing, or I'll go the other way and say, you got to work on this and fix, it's sort of like I don't always know how to balance that, because sometimes I think one cancels out the other. And anyway, I was trying to express to her that I want to be able to do both, and I think it's important. And I think that's true, not just with our significant others, if we happen to have significant others, but with the most important relationships in our lives, that we have the ability authentically to express our love and appreciation and gratitude for people, so it's real, heartfelt, genuine, and also simultaneously we can speak our deepest truth. Sometimes that could be feedback for them, and sometimes it could simply be conflict or hurt feelings for us or whatever it is. And in doing that, it creates space, it creates opening, it creates opportunity for growth and transformation that I know you know because of the work that you do, and many people listening, but that's often what it takes for us to connect deeply with other human beings in a real way. And so many people I know and work with, that's what we want.
So Mike, are you advocating that people be blunt and brutally honest all the time?
No, I'm not actually, because I'll give you an example. This is funny. Because I speak about this even in the corporate world, right? I mean, I have all these corporate clients that I work with, and I remember after one seminar, Michael, I had a woman come up to me, and she says, I'm authentic all the time. And I said, okay. I said, well, is there a problem? And she goes, yeah. And I said, what's the problem? She goes, well, I've lost some jobs because of that. And I looked at her, and I only knew her. I didn't know her. I just met her the day at the seminar, and she'd asked a few questions, interacted, so I kind of had a little bit of a sense of her. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Is it authentic or is it obnoxious? And she was like, offended that I would. I said, I'm not making an accusation. I'm just asking a question. She said, well, maybe a little bit of both. And I said, okay, well, I don't know you. I just met you today, but here's my sense. I bet you it was the obnoxious that got you fired, not the authentic. I said, because, look, I've worked with all kinds of different organizations. I've worked with many leaders over the years. I've never had anyone say to me, you know what, we fired her because she was just way too real. And so the thing is, it's not about brutal honesty. It's not about being blunt necessarily. Now, sometimes you and I both know, particularly you and I do some men's work that's similar in common and other people, there's times that what's needed in the moment in a conversation or relationship with another person is to be blunt and brutally honest with them. But that only comes when you know someone, there's a level of trust and respect there, and there's some either explicit or implicit permission for that to happen. Otherwise, it can be offensive and downright abusive, right?
Got it. There's a structure for it. There's a structure for it. There's an invitation for it. I show up at my men's group, and while I'm closer to certain men than others, there's a structure there that we know we can give each other feedback. There's an implied permission for that. I have a coaching client who works with me. I can be blunt and brutally honest with them because that's part of the agreement we have. If I have a friend that we have that agreement, great. So we got to create agreements with people or structures with people so that we can. However, there's a difference between being blunt, brutally honest, in people's face. I mean, this is one of those classic kind of, here in the U.S. at least, East Coast versus West Coast arguments about, people in New York tell like it is and people in San Francisco are,
all that stuff. And there's some truth to all of that culturally, but the issue is this. I often say to people, you want to get good at understanding the distinction between your opinions and your truth. Now, our opinions, which many of us, if you're anything like me, have lots of them, a lot of our opinions, while we may be passionate about our opinions, are filled with a certain amount of self-righteousness. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm right, they're wrong. People who don't agree with me are wrong, which, as you and I both know, creates separation, creates disconnection, creates inherent conflict. However, our truth is much deeper than that. Our truth has to do more with our experience. A lot of times it has to do with our emotion, right? So if someone came up to me and said, you know, maybe I know them and we're friends, or even my wife or someone came to give me some feedback and said, Mike, you know what? You talk too much. You're self-absorbed. You never shut up and let other people talk. Now, listen, that is not a completely out-of-the-blue random piece of feedback for me. However, if they said it to me that way, most likely I would get defensive. What do you mean? What are you talking about? I would have examples of times I did. I would, you know. However, if they told me very specifically and very vulnerably, in the moment, let's say, or even after the fact, that, wow, we were just having that conversation, I felt like I couldn't get a word in. I felt like it was all about you, and it really hurt my feelings, or it made me angry, or it disappointed, or I wanted to get off the phone, or I wanted to get up from whatever. You know, but they were real about the experience of it. That's totally different. Because what that is then all of a sudden I get a window into their world, and the feedback may be about me directly, or it may just be about what's going on in their life, but now they're checking in or sharing from a deeper level that's coming from a more authentic place. So even when we have quote-unquote brutally honest feedback for other people, when we share it from a place of our truth, you know, as people often say in this very simple but profound communication technique, using an I statement, right? I feel, I think, I notice, I want, I whatever, I, in relation to another human being, is a different conversation. By the way, the same mechanism is true when we compliment or acknowledge another person. Best to share it from the perspective of what's their positive impact on us. What do we notice and feel and experience in their presence or about them, instead of simply commenting on what they've done or some, you know what I mean? Because that's actually a positive judgment when I say you're smart, you're attractive, you're funny, you're great. You know, all those things are wonderful, but they're still judgments. They're just positive judgments.
Mm. Well, so let me ask you this, Mike. Why is it so hard for people to be authentic in our culture? Why is it so hard?
I think that's a great question for everybody listening to ask themselves first and foremost, and I'll answer it myself, but what makes it difficult? This is one of the best questions you can ask yourself, and one of the best ways to start moving into a deeper sense of authenticity in your life, in a particular relationship, as it relates to your work, in anything you're dealing with, is what makes it difficult for me to be my authentic self with fill in the blank, this person, this situation. And not from a place of judgmentalness, but just from a place of awareness. Because how we start to open up deeper levels of authenticity is by first confronting what makes it difficult. I think there's a number of things. And the whole first third of Be Yourself, everyone else has already taken. I go in detail to both what I call the cultural and the personal aspects of this. I think as a culture, as I alluded to earlier, we're not trained to be authentic. We're not encouraged necessarily. We don't have a lot of good models. And I'm not saying this to be critical and judgmental per se, but look at the leaders in our culture, if you will, and the leaders that we've grown up with, both politically and often organizationally, if you work in an organizational world, or even our parents or family members. And, you know, not a lot of vulnerable, authentic leadership, if you will. And you turn on the news, right? You listen to people talk in conversations. You see people, whatever the case may be, we don't see it modeled all that much, so it's hard to know. Another thing is, as you and I were talking about earlier, it's kind of hard to define, and my version of authenticity might be different than yours. And we live in a culture, especially today, that's really obsessed with looking good, physically looking good, but also just making sure we're covering our own you-know-what and doing and saying all the right things. And in this YouTube, you know, sort of social network generation we're living in, a lot of beautiful aspects of it, as you and I both know, given the work that we do. However, every moment, every time, and doesn't mean even just being a public figure or a, you know, famous person, but people are mindful of what they do and say and sort of constantly editing things. That being said, I think the deeper reasons, Michael, that we struggle with authenticity has more to do with personal stuff. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of judgment, fear of losing something. You know, one of the things I share about in Be Yourself is that my wife, Michelle, and I, we met back in 2000 and moved in together 2002, and it was probably around, when was it, 2004. We've been living together for about 2 years, and you know, a lot of conversation in our community and people around us about, well, when are you guys getting married? And a lot of conversation in our relationship. My wife's actually a couple of years older than I am, you know, and her clock was ticking, and all these things are happening, and we're talking about where's our relationship going, and we were doing great. I was feeling really good about our relationship, but I wasn't ready to get married myself. And we talked about it, and it was going into lots of, you know, psychoanalysis about commitment issues and all this, and, you know, whatever. I'd heard a lot of stuff, and she'd had some really deep personal conversations about it and gotten some great coaching and counseling and you name it, but I wasn't able to really get to the source of what was going on for me. And then we went and did this great workshop with Debbie Ford, who I absolutely love, called The Shadow Process.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And what I got when I was in the shadow process was a real sense of how scared I was, deeply scared that my parents had split up when I was 3. My dad hadn't been around a lot for me as a kid. My dad had bipolar disorder, and I had struggled with depression, and I just had all these fears around, I'm going to screw this thing up royally. And I couldn't bring myself to deal with that fear, and underneath it the pain of, what if I hurt you? What if we have children and I'm not up to being a father? And there was a place of real just terror on my part that I was kind of aware of mentally, but I got in touch with emotionally. And in that process, and then in ultimately sharing it with my then girlfriend, now wife, Michelle, 2 things were interesting to me. Number one, of course, she already knew energetically. That's part of what was going on, you know. One of the things I love about my wife and many women in general is just how intuitive they are and how intuitive she is. So she knew that. But the second thing was how liberated I was to get in touch with that fear, even though it was painful and scary, and even share it directly with her. But it wasn't easy. And the feeling of vulnerability, I remember having that conversation and really going to that place with her. But here's what was amazing for me, is that in doing that, literally, like the next week, I remember sitting with myself, and as I was in my own meditation thinking, practicing at the time something new to me that now has become not so new, is self-trust, and asking myself, I really trust myself in this moment. What would I do? What would I say? It's like, well, I would ask this woman that I'm madly in love with to be my wife. And so I did. After all that fear and all that resistance, I proposed to my wife, and we got married in 2005. We've been married for, the last 6.5 years, and we have 2 beautiful little girls. And I share that from the standpoint of one of the biggest things that holds us back, I think, from authenticity is our fear of whatever it is we might find, whatever it is we might expose and express to other people. And it's human. It's normal. And I think the more, and it doesn't mean, by the way, just to sort of finish that story, it doesn't mean I have no fear anymore about marriage and fatherhood and things don't come up and I don't have to deal with things with my wife. Of course I do. But I think, again, that's the whole thing about authenticity being a way of life, a way of being, not something that we do or something that we get or something that we are, if you will. It's something that we practice.
And so let me ask you this, Mike. If you can give this to us, like, how can people learn? How can they learn how to be more real in their lives?
It's a great question. It's a practice, and one of the things I try to do in the book is I get into the 5 principles of authenticity and then break out some different actions and practices, but a couple specific things from the book that you can do, and just in general. The first thing you can do is start getting in touch with where and why it's difficult for you to be authentic. Again, no judgment, but just notice. And if you can start to notice it for yourself, but even be willing to share that with other people, that's one of the ways. One of the ways to start being more authentic is just start admitting when we're not being authentic or when it's hard or when we're scared. I work with a number of corporations, as we were talking about and you mentioned when you were introducing me, and one of the things I'll do often if I'm working with a team, I have little simple practices and meetings and things, and it's a very simple, almost kind of goofy little practice, but I'll be working with a team, or maybe we'll do some work over time, and we have this practice that when someone's scared to say something, the challenge is, and the request is, they say it anyway. So they raise their hand, and then they say, I'm scared to say this. Can I say it anyway? and then wait for everybody to respond yes, which every time almost everyone will say yes, right?
Right?
But it's like a little practice, a little mental thing. I'm scared to say this. Can I say it anyway? Yes. And then they say it. And usually just that sort of sets them up to then say the scary thing they're going to say. And 99 times out of 100, Michael, the thing that comes out of their mouth, everyone else in the room is kind of like, why were they scared to say that? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And not like a judgment, but just like the things we're scared to ask or express or disagree with or whatever tend to not be a big deal out of our mouth. They're just a big deal in our head. So that's one thing, is just start getting in touch with what makes it difficult or what's scary or challenging. Second thing you can do is look for the people in your life right now already who you feel the safest with, you feel the most comfortable with, you feel the most secure, like you're not as concerned that if you say something or do something, they're going to run for the hills and go, he's a freak or she's weird, or, and start practicing with them, if you will, deepening your relationship and your level of authenticity and vulnerability for the purpose of then being able to do that in your life in a larger sense, if you will. And then a third thing is, and this is something that there's a specific technique that I lay out in the chapter on expressing yourself and be yourself, everyone else already taken, and it's called clearing withholds. Now, this is something a great practice to do with a significant other if you happen to have one, but also a great thing to do with good friends, family members, even business partners or associates. Michelle and I do this often, is that it just goes like this. It seems simple on the surface, and it is, but pretty deep and profound, is that we'll sit and we'll talk. We often do this date nights and times when we're just connecting the two of us, and I'll say to Michelle, there's something I've withheld from you. And she says to me, okay, would you like to tell me? And I say yes, and then I say whatever the thing is. And it could be the most trivial to the most deep. It doesn't matter, but her response, part of this is a practice. This is kind of a setting a container, as you and I might call it, Michael. Her only response is to just say thank you when I say whatever I have to say. So there's no discussion, no dialogue, no feedback in the moment. Now, then she might say back to me, I have something I've withheld from you. Okay, would you like to tell me? Yes, and then she'll tell me, and I'll say thank you. And we may go back and forth, or one of us may go for a while, and then we'll switch. We kind of just feel it out in the moment. But the point of it is giving a safe space to say things that might be scary to say to another person, knowing that they're not going to react or even respond in the moment. They're just going to say thank you and receive the communication. Then what we'll often do is when we get done, we'll say, is there anything we need to talk about? A lot of the things, what we find, we don't even have to talk about them. They're resolved just by the mere expression of them. Sometimes it's like, hey, that one triggered me, or I'm curious about this, or can we talk more about this? But usually creating that space of vulnerability opens up that now the conversation is way different than if I just sort of pulled her aside and said, hey, listen, blah, 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 So it creates a container, if you will, creates an environment to do that. So those are some things. There's lots of other things that people can do, but those are a couple of things that people can do right away, start to implement to bring more authenticity into their lives.
Wow, and I'm going to I'm taking notes right here, right now, Mike, and I'm going to implement some of those things in my life and use them as well. And I hope if you're out there listening that you do that as well. And I want to bring the call to a close here, Mike. And I just want to acknowledge you and thank you, for putting this book out there. And I think that it's awesome and courageous work that you're doing. And
thank you.
I think you're an amazing man, and you're a beautiful brother. And I love your goatee, by the way. Keep the goatee, man. Keep the goatee, man.
I have it mostly. I have it right now, but there's probably a few photos and videos on me without it. But I hear you. Thanks. Thanks for the feedback.
And, I want to let everybody know that, again, where they can get your book, because Mike just kind of scratched the surface here with his book. You got a couple tips here, and you just got started with it. But if you go out and get the book, I think that, you can really get into it, take this even further and further, because I'm sure it goes into it more. And again, the book. Yeah,
thank you, Michael. The best place for people to go for the book actually is my main website, which is mike-robbins.com. That's MIKE-ROBBINS.com. You can buy the book there. You also can sign up for my free email newsletter, and there's other information about where I'm speaking and doing workshops and all kinds of good stuff. So there's resources on the site and my blog and lots of stuff that I've written over the last, 7, 8, 9 years. So mike-robbins.com is the best place to go. Okay, beautiful. Yeah, head there. And again, the book is called Be Yourself, Everyone Is Already Taken, a book that explores authenticity. So go pick the book up there. And Mike, again, it was just an honor and a pleasure having you here. And I look forward to doing it again. Maybe we can do another one around your other book. That would be great, Michael. Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad that we've connected, and keep up the great work, and I appreciate you having me on here.
I will do that, brother. You take good